make about 45 million pounds of chips in a quarter. That equates to about 200 million pounds of potatoes, which is quite a few. What's interesting with M&T is they're a small town bank, and as we've grown, they've also grown with us. They've got the resources that you would need in order to go big, but they also have that friendly local community feel so that it makes it seem easier than it probably is.
Hello, welcome to Candidates Up Front. This series of interviews with candidates on the November 3rd general election ballot is brought to you by Berks Community Television and the League of Women Voters of Berks County. Both organizations are nonpartisan. That means we never support candidates nor political parties. But both organizations consider it their mission to provide voters with information about each election. I'm Judith Cranus, a member of the League. First, if you are not registered to vote, go to votespa.com to register. Votespa.com is in English and in Spanish, and you have until October 18th to register, but the smart thing is, do it now. If you do not want to stand in line on Election Day, apply for a mail-in ballot. Again, go to votespa.com. Do it now. When your ballot arrives, mail it in right away. We help our Berks County Election Services Office handle this election smoothly if we are timely. And if you choose to go to your polling place on Election Day, polls are open from 7 in the morning till 8 at night. This year, we will vote for Pennsylvania Attorney General, Auditor General, and Treasurer. We will also elect representatives to the U.S. Congress, to the Pennsylvania Senate, and to the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. The League and BCTV invited all but the statewide candidates to be interviewed. Some did not reply, some declined. Those who agreed will be asked the same questions in the same order and with the same time limits as others running for the same office. These interviews will be available on BCTV's webpage and YouTube channel. If you watch the interviews of two competing candidates, you can compare their answer to make your decision on how you will vote. This interview is for the Pennsylvania House of Representatives in the 124th District. This district is in northern Berks County. State representatives serve a 2-year term in the state legislature in Harrisburg. They initiate legislation and vote to create laws. They pass the budget, including taxes and expenditures of the state. They offer help about state government to constituents of their districts. The salary for a state senator is $88,610 per year, plus benefits and expenses. The two candidates are Tyler Picone, the Democrat, and Jerry Knowles, the Republican. This interview is with Tyler Picone. He is the challenger. Welcome, Mr. Picone. Tell us, why do you want to be a state representative, and what are your qualifications for this position?
Well, first I want to say thank you to Berks County TV and the League of Women Voters for having me. Thank you, Judith, for agreeing to interview us and get our message out there. I'm running to be a state representative because in my district, I think what we lack is proactive leadership. We lack a leader in the State House who will do things for the people and solve problems for the people that will go beyond just the next election, but impact generations to come, and take a proactive approach towards that problem solving, as well as a collaborative approach towards that problem solving, working across party lines, because regardless of what party we belong to, once elected, we are elected to represent all of the people in our district. And it's important that we understand that all voices in that district matter, and that the communities around our district matter, because we're all part of the same Commonwealth and we need to work together. My experience comes from over 14 years serving in the Pennsylvania National Guard, leading soldiers from all different walks of life, communities, backgrounds, religions. So I know I have the leadership credentials to do the job.
What are the three most important things you want to accomplish if elected?
There are several issues facing Pennsylvanians today, and the three that are important to me are working to cap prescription copays so that no hardworking Pennsylvania family ever has to make the decision between affording medication that they need to survive or putting food on their table. I want to work to end gerrymandering because legislators should not have the power to pick their voters. It should be a citizens commission that elects, that draws those district lines. And third, I want to work to eliminate property tax, or at least take significant steps towards reducing property tax, because it is a burden on our homeowners, particularly those who are on a fixed income, because they live in fear that they may someday be priced out of their home, and that shouldn't be the case.
What do you think about state management of COVID-19? Do you see a greater impact on minorities and women?
I think that initially the state had a good response to COVID-19. I think where we've faltered is that as time has gone on and we've learned more about the virus and how to protect the right people, it became too much of a partisan game. And we stopped trying to solve the actual problem. We just, both sides look to score political points. So I think that there's room for improvement in the way that we've responded to it. And I hope and I urge our current elected officials to begin working together. I do see more of an impact, particularly on minorities, because we know that minorities often have other conditions that become exacerbated by something like a life-threatening disease, because they typically may struggle with health insurance or some of the other things that would make having that disease easier to manage if all those other affairs weren't already at a disadvantage for them.
We currently have no county health department in Berks County. Do we need one? And should this be paid for by state government?
So I think having a county health department would be a great idea and may have been something that would have helped coordinate our response to COVID-19. I think that's a really timely question. I think some portion of it should be funded by the state, and I would like to see county health departments, across the state, because I think that that distribution of responsibility can really help us operate at a more efficient manner, assuming that we're all operating from the same sheet of music. And I would be fine with some state money, being spent to help stand up and organize and run those types of agencies within our communities, because I think that they can operate within those communities because they'll have an intimate knowledge of those communities and the people that they're supporting and the types of problems and issues and illnesses that affect their specific communities, and they'll have a better response and do a better job working in their own community.
What do you think are common sense gun violence controls the state should have in place?
I think an easy one to do is to expand our background checks to include private sales so that we are safe and secure in that. I think our background check system works well, and I think we should expand that. I also think we need to do a better job of removing the stigma of mental health. This is something that while serving in the military, the military still has some progress to make here. Unfortunately, we still have too many suicides and issues like that in uniform and among our veterans. But the military has recognized and done, I think, a lot of great work to try and reduce that stigma of mental health, particularly in a profession that is often, very tough and macho. And I think that we need to do that. We need to expand on that here in the civilian world and do a better job promoting mental health, because I think that we could eliminate some of this violence if we had a better mental health program in our country.
As a legislator, what will your role be to reduce violence in our communities?
So I think there's two things that are, as a leader that we're responsible to do. First is to lead by example. We can't be the type of leader that is do as I say, not as I do. We have to lead by example and be good stewards of the people that we are elected to represent. The other thing that we have to do to make a difference is we have to be willing to elevate the voices of those who are victims and share their story and encourage them to come forward and involve them in the process of making reforms, because they are intimately familiar with what has happened to them, and they have that firsthand knowledge to help us make educated, informed decisions about how we can fix some of these things. So involving those people, elevating their voice, is a great way that we can help reduce violence and be leaders.
Following the census, our state legislators will redraw district lines for federal and state officials. This has led to gerrymandering, which you mentioned is one of your goals to get rid of. Districts that favor one party over another. The question originally was, do you think this is fair to voters? And what will you do to give the voters fair districts?
It's not fair to voters, and gerrymandering is wrong regardless of what party is doing it. Although here in Pennsylvania, our state house has been almost exclusively controlled by the Republican Party since the mid-1990s, and they've had some trifectas with the governor as well. So they've had plenty of opportunities to enact fair district legislation that they claim to support, yet they never bring it out of committee for a vote. I support our Fair Districts initiatives, House Bills 22 and 23, that would form a commission of citizens to draw the district lines and remove that power from the legislators. Again, it doesn't matter if it's Republicans or Democrats that have that power. It's wrong. Legislators should not have the power to pick their voters. That power belongs to the people in the community. So I support a Fair Districts bill and that amendment to the Constitution, the Pennsylvania Constitution, that would allow citizens to draw those lines and remove that partisan influence from our districts.
Small business is important to Berks County's economy. Will you favor additional state funds to help them survive the pandemic?
I do. I support our small businesses, and I know that they have been hardest hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. And one of the things, we talked about earlier, the state's response, and I think one of the things we faltered on was, these small businesses had to wait for guidance and struggle to open and figure out how to survive, while we saw a lot of big box stores and corporations continue to operate kind of unhindered. So I'm not going to support giving any kind of financial aid to these large corporations that have continued to not only be able to be in business, but in a lot of ways may have benefited because some of their smaller competitors were not open for business. Small businesses are the lifeblood of our community. When we contribute to small businesses, we're not buying another vacation home for somebody. We're helping, buy that family, the ability for their children to play sports that fall. So I'm a big supporter of our small business, and I would absolutely agree to see some state funding help those to recover from the coronavirus pandemic.
What should be done to prevent evictions and address homelessness during this pandemic?
So this is a bipartisan issue. We have to do, we have to come together to work on this. And as a landlord, I understand that people who are landlords need to be made whole and they need to have that rent payment because they have their own bills to pay. So this has to be a holistic approach. So we need to not only, talk about moratoriums temporarily on evictions and rent, but we need to have a plan going forward on how we get whole with this. And it needs to be an inclusive plan that includes the renters, the landlords, mortgage companies, the state as well for the collection of taxes. This could not be done in a vacuum, and it can't be allowed to become a partisan issue because then somebody will suffer as a result of it. So this is one of those issues where I talked about earlier, the ability to collaborate and reach across the aisle and find a solution, because the only people that will hurt if we don't do that are the people in our communities.
What is your plan to address the crumbling infrastructure in the state?
So I think, when we talk about infrastructure, again, this is another bipartisan area that should have lots of support because it's something we all use every day. The infrastructure doesn't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican or an independent. The roads you drive on, the bridges you're on, whether or not you have reliable internet service in your area is all part of our infrastructure. And so we need to take steps forward to spend our money towards renewing that infrastructure. We can create jobs that way, which will help boost our economy, especially in the wake of COVID-19. This should be a top priority for the legislature moving into the next session to talk about how we can get people back to work and improve the infrastructure. And I would like to see special emphasis put on the access to broadband internet in our rural communities, because as COVID has shown us, those communities were at a significant disadvantage as we transition to working from home and virtual learning. Those communities are the ones who have struggled to be able to do that without access to that broadband internet.
Will you support raising the minimum wage, and what should that wage be?
I do support raising the minimum wage. I think that we need to do that in a graduated process to get there. I think that $15 is the right goal. We're seeing states all around us increase their wages, so we need to stay competitive the same way that we try to be competitive with tax breaks to get corporations to come into the state. We don't want to lose workers to other states because they're raising their wages and we aren't. The other thing that's critical about this is tying that wage to inflation so that we don't have to constantly revisit this conversation every couple of years. So we need to take steps to get us to $15 an hour and tie that to inflation so that we can continue to have a living wage for everybody in the community.
Agriculture counts for about half of Berks County's economy, and our local farmers are adapting as much as they can to changes in the climate. Do you think the state should do more to address climate change to protect our local agriculture? And what should the state do?
I do think we should do more, and I don't think anybody is anti-clean environment. What they are is anti-losing their job, and so we need to make sure that as we talk about climate change and different programs, that we couple that up with the economy and make sure that we're not having people lose their jobs. Particularly when it comes to agriculture, some of the things we can do is working with farmers to make their farms more sustainable, make them more profitable by helping them diversify crops. There is a demand for industrial hemp, but we lack the processing plants and the ability to do anything with that product right now, creating those types of new infrastructure so that farmers could diversify their crops and work to better support their families are all things that we could do to help improve that economy. And it's important here in the 124th, not only in Berks, but up into the rest of my district into Schuylkill County as well.
Pennsylvania has passed bills to help root out rogue police. Would we be better off if we separated the crime-fighting functions of a police department from social service functions?
I don't think that we should separate the two. I think they need to work together. And I kind of like to explain it this way. We have decided when we have pilots fly planes that we want them to focus on the flight of the aircraft. So we train them to do specifically that. And we don't ask them to do anything else that isn't involved with the flight of the aircraft. They're not taking the tickets, seating the passengers, doing the beverage service, loading the plane, fueling the plane, fixing the plane. But their ability to fly the plane is meaningless if all of those people don't work together to have a safe, productive flight. So I think that when we talk about this hashtag defund the police, I don't support that verbiage because it sounds like a punishment that we're taking something away from police, when reality is that we need to shift some responsibility so that police don't become the Band-Aid for every societal problem. But when we shift that responsibility, we should shift some of the money with it and create a comprehensive collaborative team of law enforcement and social service workers who can best address the problems that face our community together.
Do you believe there is systemic racism in Pennsylvania? And if so, how will you help change it?
I think that there's systemic racism still, present in America everywhere, in pockets, in different places. And sure, there are some places that have done a better job eliminating this than others. But it's a conversation we need to continue to keep having. And I think that that's, one of the things that we should be doing is continuing that conversation. Again, elevating the voices of people who have not had their voices equally heard for as long as everybody else. So continuing to have an open dialogue, being open to that discussion, coming from a place of empathy, a willingness to learn and understand, not meeting that with resistance or violence, and also not promoting that conversation with violence. I think it's really through word and talking to each other that we can promote this and change it, and it will take time, but we can do it by working together.
Discrimination in housing against LGBTQ people is still legal in Pennsylvania. Should we have laws to stop this discrimination?
Yes, we need to add, protections for LGBTQ to the civil rights bill that protects people from whether it's housing or keeping their job. People should have basic human rights and that are not, able to be taken away from them because of who they love or who they identify as. That's just not acceptable in our communities. And, I had a really good mentor who explained it the best way to me is this, that when someone feels like something, they don't feel like someone. And so we have to stop treating people as if they're not entitled to the same basic human rights of a job and a house simply because of who they love or how they identify themselves with their sexual identity.
There are inequities in the funding of our public schools. Schools in rich zip codes thrive, schools in poor zip codes struggle. What will you do to provide every child in Pennsylvania a quality education?
There are two things that we have to do to fix this problem. First is we need to increase state funding spent on education. Currently, Pennsylvania is 46th in the nation on state spending in education. We deserve better for our children. Our children deserve better. The other thing that we need to do is spend more of that money through the fair funding formula. Currently, I think only 9% of state funding is filtered through a fair funding formula. We need to increase that drastically because your zip code should not determine the quality of your education. So we need to increase our state funding on education, and we do that by creating new revenue streams. For example, legalizing recreational marijuana, where Colorado has seen a $1.4 billion revenue since 2014 in the sale of recreational and medicinal marijuana. That is money that could be used to help support our schools and work towards property tax elimination.
People never like taxes, yet they are necessary. In this time of increasing disparity between the incomes of the well-to-do and the poor, is a flat income tax, as we have in Pennsylvania, still appropriate? And tell us why.
I think that it's fine for right now. I think it's something we're going to have to address and look at, especially in the wake of COVID-19. Having a flat tax is essentially fair, but we also have a problem with not raising the wage. There are other factors in there that are making that flat tax unfair. So we have to, I think, take a look at that, especially in the wake of COVID-19. And if we can find ways to adjust the tax brackets and the tax system so that we can ease the burden for people on the lower end of the income scale, that's going to be to our economic advantage in the long run, because those are the folks who are out spending money and helping build the economy. So, where we are right now is okay, but I think it's something that's going to need a serious look at, especially in the wake of COVID-19, as we try to figure out how we balance our budget and move forward.
The next budget, now that you mention it, will be very tight because of the impact of COVID-19. Where will you cut? What services do you feel are essential?
So I think it's really important that our elected officials understand that it's not about where I will cut. This has to be a team effort. This has got to be done collaboratively because it impacts the entire state. So we as elected officials need to go into Harrisburg with the understanding that it is not my way or the highway. It is not, I want this program cut or I'm not agreeing to anything else. This has to be a collaborative team effort where we work together to solve this problem because if we don't do that, this is not something we can afford to have partisan gridlock on. We are legally mandated to have a balanced budget. We have got to do this as a team effort. And we do have to take a look at places to cut. And it's going to be difficult and it's going to be hard. It's no different than a family who has a spouse lose an income. That family has to adjust the way they spend money. Our state has to do the same thing. There are some essential services that are non-debatable, and every service is essential to someone. So again, this has got to be a team effort that we do together, or we're going to hurt a lot of people.
Do you believe the fracking industry has caused environmental damage? And if so, what dollar amount of fees or fines should be charged, and how should those monies be dispersed?
I do think that the fracking industry has caused environmental harm. There's been spills, there's been leaks and issues. Most notably, there was an issue, not far from here, where a tremendous amount of waste product was emptied into, a watershed. That's a problem, and it impacts our environment. It impacts our clean air and our clean water, which is constitutionally guaranteed to us here in Pennsylvania. So we need to hold those companies accountable for practices that occur like that. As far as how we charge and how we distribute that money, I think that needs to be addressed on a case-by-case basis. We need to look at the quantity the totality of the damage. We need to look at who was impacted the most and what effects have been caused by that spill or damage, and distribute monies appropriately in order to fix the damage that was done. So it's a serious issue. Fracking is it's a job, so it's important. We don't want to shut it down and lose those jobs, but we've got to take it seriously and we've got to manage the impacts when they occur.
Should Pennsylvania decrease the use of fossil fuels and carbon emissions? And if so, how? And what would be a reasonable time frame to do this?
So yes, I think that we need to take steps forward to do that. I don't really think that that's so much the debate anymore, but to your point, how do we do that and what does that time frame look like? As I mentioned earlier, this is a big deal in my district because we talk about clean environment opportunities all the time. We talk about renewable energy and transitioning energy sources, but particularly up in the Schuylkill County part of my district, that's coal country, and people are not, again, they're not anti-clean environment, they're anti-losing their jobs. job. And often what happens when we talk about these renewable energy sources, we talk about transitioning to different energy sources, those jobs and opportunities don't come to coal country. And that's what I talked about at the beginning of this interview. As a proactive leader, we have to lean forward and bring those career opportunities to our district, because it's not enough to tell people that we have to transition off of fossil fuel. People in this district will not vote for such a plan if it leaves them economically disadvantaged. It just doesn't make sense for them to do that. So we've got to build a plan that brings those opportunities, and there's no reason that the amazing heritage up in the 124th district of powering this nation with coal and steel and railroad can't continue on for years to come, but it might look a little bit different. It might be building solar panels and erecting solar farms and wind turbines and maintaining that equipment and manufacturing it for distribution all across the country. We can do that in the 124th.
Thank you. We do have about 60 seconds left. Would you make a closing statement?
Sure. Well, thank you again for having me and giving me this opportunity to address the voters through BCTV. It's really been an honor and a privilege to run for office. I'm excited to be one of the first candidates to run against this incumbent in nearly a decade. I question the type of leadership contract somebody can have with their constituents when they haven't really had to earn the job for 10 years. So I'm urging voters to consider a new choice, new leadership, proactive leadership that is going to work for you regardless of what party you're from, who you identify as, who you love. My commitment to the people of the 124th is that my door will always be open to you. I will always hear your voice, take your concerns seriously, and I will always have them on my mind when I'm standing in Harrisburg making decisions on behalf, not for who I am and not for just what I believe in, but my commitment is to who you are and what you believe in. And I believe that that's what leadership means. And I think that's what we need in Harrisburg for the 124th. So I hope that voters will consider a new leader for our district.
Thank you, Mr. Picone. I'm going to remind all our home viewers that if you have any questions about how you vote, where you vote, whether you're registered, votespa.com will answer all your questions. It takes you into the state website, which keeps that information. Everything is secure. They're all locked down websites, safe to use, and we would encourage you as league members and as BCTV to make sure that you are registered. And again, that mail-in ballot, if that's the choice you make, it will be safe and secure. Apply early, send it back early, and Election Services has hired 10 more people, so they are prepared to process all those ballots. Our election board, from my conversations with them, is very much on top of this situation. So we thank you for watching. This is Candidates Up Front.
We make about 45 million pounds of chips in a quarter. That equates to about 200 million pounds of potatoes, which is quite a few. What's interesting with M&T is they're a small town bank, and as we've grown, they've also grown with us. They've got the resources that you would need in order to go big, but they also have that friendly local community feel so that it makes it seem easier than it probably is.